And the crazy thing is, they don't even know what a woman is. But tell me, what is a woman? It used to be, we just want rights, love is love, and then it turned to, if you don't bake this cake for me, you're fired. And now it's, we will read to children, we will go into women's locker rooms.
When you answer before God on Judgment Day, at least have something to say. I did something. When this came to my city, when this came to my country, when the evil came, it did not go unanswered by me. You better have done something to say, I stood up for righteousness.
What do you do in a time of war? If not be aggressive, if not fight for those who need to be fought for, if not to defend those who need defending. So the Canadian government has really cracked down on Christians, and specifically pastors and preachers. And more recently, they have targeted anyone who disagrees with exposing children to biological men dressed as women reading to children. So Deklan, recently you were at one of those events.
Yep.
Tell me, what do you make of what's going on there?
I think it's completely wrong and disgusting. I think any sexual performance in front of children is absolutely abhorrent. I think if a child can't meaningfully consent to sex, he should never meaningfully consent to looking at something sexually explicit. And I don't understand why these people, I'm going to call them sexual deviants because that's what they are. I don't know why they demand an audience in front of children. Why do they always demand that? They always pursue and go after the children, and it disturbs me greatly.
What do you think of the government passing laws that protect these performers, quote unquote, and attack Christians who disagree with this agenda?
I think it's a sign of the times. I think it's completely wicked and evil, and it shows the heart of our government and our nation. And I think that's scary. And I think that's a good reason for Christians and anyone who thinks this is wrong to get out and fight and demand that this be uprooted and this be taken away, because it's completely wrong.
Now, this isn't the first time something like this has happened, where a pastor has been arrested simply for expressing his opinion, simply for disagreeing with something he believes to be wrong, simply for doing something that the Bible tells him to do. In Canada, we've seen this trend dozens of times with many different pastors, many different Christians, many different preachers. And you happen to be the son of one Christian who was actually arrested in the city of Calgary. Am I right?
That's right. He was arrested for supporting Arthur Pawlowski, who was in jail for 51 days. He was leading an event in which we stood in front of the Remand Center and demanded your father's freedom. And that's the reason they drag him out on the streets and they arrested him. But they also saw that they were wrong, and my dad has 8 children. So all of them were out there. They were, my little brother, he was 2 at the time. And he looked to the officer and said, "Shame on you." So I think it was about a 30-minute fiasco, and then they ripped up our tickets and let us go.
Well, that 2-year-old has more bravery than 99.9% of Christians in Canada.
That's true.
But he wasn't just arrested for that. Am I right? He was arrested for honking.
Yeah, at the time, there was a bylaw of some sort that said, because of the freedom rallies, I believe, that honking was illegal. Which was weird, because I think there were about 20 other cars that went before us, all honking for the exact same reason. But since my dad was leading this event mostly, he was pulled over. And just for the sake of consistency, there was an 80-year-old lady with us behind us in her car, and she was also pulled over and ticketed.
So would you say your father was targeted?
Oh, yeah, 100%. It was embarrassing. Not for us, but for the police officer, I think, to target a man with 8 children for standing up for a pastor, and they take the side of the city for honking. It was ridiculous.
So we have something in common. You're the son of a preacher, a pastor who was arrested. I'm the son of a pastor who was arrested, 16 times. But we have that in common, where we're targeted for simply being family members of people who stood up against this. So recently, something happened where you and I were actually targeted by government officials, by government enforcement, for simply being related to people who are fighting against this. And of course, you and I also stand up against this stuff, but just by default, I guess, just because we're related to these people, we also get targeted. So tell me what happened on Saturday.
Well, there was a huge LGBTQ protest I believe, supporting drag queens and this sexual perversion that's been happening. And there was also a counter protest of Christians, I believe, and freedom fighters who believe that this is wrong. So they're probably...
Well, they weren't just there for that. They were there because a biological man went into a woman's change room in front of a teenage girl naked.
Yeah.
So these Christians, these patriots, these quote unquote freedom fighters were protesting that.
Yeah.
And these Antifa, LGBTQ activists were in support of that, I guess.
I guess so. That's what they showed up in support of, I would assume, which is disgusting also that you think that's right. A grown man, if he decides to so pronounce himself a woman, he can walk into a woman's bathroom in front of your daughters, in front of your wives, your children, and do who knows what. God knows what he's going to do in there. That's un-okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So these protesters surrounded these Christians. We watched a clip of that, and they surrounded these Christians, and they kept pushing, and many assaults, of course, occurred.
Yep.
I believe a murder attempt occurred.
Yep.
And they kept pushing and pushing closer to what looked like City Hall.
Yeah.
And what happened next?
Well, it was starting to turn from harassment into outright violence. The lady who was filming for us was getting hit by signs. We were being poked and prodded and being pushed further and further towards City Hall. And finally, the police saw what was happening and let us in, which they weren't doing anything to stop it in the first place. So it was kind of their obligation because they left us to these people. And so we were ushered into City Hall. Everything was put on lockdown.
But you were punished for this.
Yeah.
Were you not? The security and the police actually punished you, even though they let us in.
Yeah.
They punished all of us, actually.
Right.
Just simply for seeking refuge.
Yeah.
From these animals who were violently attacking.
Yeah, so they abandoned us to these people. They left us surrounded. There were probably about 5 of us, I would say, surrounded by them. Then when they finally realized they probably needed to do something and they let us in, once they had let us in, they trespassed us all for 30 days. And they were the ones who let us in. And they were very unhappy with us for being there in the first place. So it was very, I think mixed messaging is a wrong way to say it. I think it was biased and not towards us.
Did it feel like the enforcement was fair, unbiased, unprejudiced, or did it feel like there was an agenda behind how the police were interacting with both sides? Do you think that there was some prejudice that may have come from politics?
100%. I saw a lot of their members getting very physical. Like you said, they tried to push someone into traffic. They got in people's faces. They started hitting people. They ran away in terror because they were being violent. If any of us did that, I can tell you for certain we'd be taken away. It would be over. If any of us started hitting them with signs, started pushing them in, started, getting in the way of their equipment, being abusive, spitting on them, that happened, it would be over. And the police, for a while, they tried to. It was a half attempt to separate us, and then, like I said, after a while, they just left us to them. So there was definitely a ton of bias, and then the fact that we got trespassed.
It seems a little bit like there's a new excuse for them. Before it was COVID.
Yep.
COVID was the excuse to crack down on Christians, and now since COVID is over, they've switched to now the drag, trans, LGBTQ agenda. And now that's their golden calf, so to speak. And that's what they're using as a pretext to go after Christians.
Yeah.
The mayor of Calgary put out tweets that are blatantly discriminatory, and she passed bylaws that are blatantly discriminatory. She's passing laws that go against religious freedoms.
Yeah.
And she's telling you that you're not allowed to protest if she believes that it's a wrong protest. If the protest goes against her personal views, you're not allowed to protest it.
Yep.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's exactly like you said. In the last 2-3 years, it felt more generalized, broad. Yeah, they wouldn't let us meet for church. They wouldn't let pastors and clergymen do their job. But it was a lot broader of an attack because it was on everyone. No one was allowed to go out. Everyone had to wear a mask, etc. Now it seems much more directed at Christians. And it seems much more to not just anger us, but outright yell in the face of God and say, we're going to do this whether you like it or not. So when they do these drag shows for children, and when they do all these things, it's a lot more of a focused attack. And you notice who they've been arresting lately, who they've been dragging away, because we're the only ones that will stand up and say, this is wrong, this is sinful, and this is disgusting. It shouldn't be done in front of normal people, but children, that's a line that especially is too far to cross.
And I find it very bizarre that something that is considered a mental illness, gender dysphoria, according to the DSM-5, the psychological manual, is now being praised and pushed on children. So something that's considered a genuine mental illness, a mental disorder, is being pushed on children, and the government is enabling this to happen. They're allowing this to happen, and they're encouraging this to happen, and they're denying anyone to disagree with that agenda. And that, I believe, is absolutely sick and wrong.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a slippery slope fallacy to say, well, once they push this agenda, what's to stop them from sexually consenting to relations with adults?
Well, I believe we're at the end of that slope.
Yeah.
Right. It used to be, we just want rights. Love is love. Yeah. And then it turned to, if you don't bake this cake for me, you're fired. And now it's, we will read to children. We will go into into women's locker rooms in front of little girls and parade ourselves naked.
Yeah. And if you as a Christian come out and stand against this and say, this is wrong, non-violently even, and any little thing, they'll trespass you, they'll ticket you, they will protect you, they'll purposely put you in harm's way.
Yeah, absolutely.